Vikings have certainly been to many places. They colonized Iceland and Greenland, they explored parts of North America, they raided through Russia, but perhaps one of the most famous places they raided time and time again was England. The first known raid was famously in Lindisfarne in England, and they also formed the Danelaw, which controlled half of modern-day England at the time. Even after England formed, the Vikings would come to rule England a few times under several leaders, and of course William the Conqueror and his Normans were technically Vikings. But with all this stuff going on, what on earth happened to Scotland during this time? Turns out the Vikings would do quite a lot of things in Scotland and make a big impact there too. This video is sponsored by Vikings War of Clans. Vikings War of Clans tries to bring back that 90s RPG feel that many of us used to enjoy all the time. Over 20 million players play on it every day, which evolves the game as you fight over things like resources. It can make it very addictive. You can also compete by forging new alliances as you increase the power of your own clan, as well as the clans of your friends. Support my channel by downloading Vikings for free, only from the link in the description box, and get a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield. Don't forget to look me up and join my Vikings clan under my nickname EmperorTigerstar. Let's fight for glory! Sadly, the earliest moment of contact between Vikings and Scots is not known, and there are several theories but nothing confirmed. Occasionally we have evidence of this one area recording some amount of history just suddenly disappearing, and maybe that was because of the Viking raid, but again we're not sure. But one thing we do know is that the islands surrounding Scotland were very much sought after by the Vikings. They made good maritime stops for their ships as well as settlements, and when they began migrating they wanted to settle there. We do know at some point a few of these islands that did have either Scottish, Pictish, or Irish settlers got supplanted by the Norse settlers. There are also some who say that there was a gradual Norse influence spreading on the islands until they established hegemony over it, but then there's also a much darker theory of genocide, but we still don't know for sure. Eventually the Viking control over these islands, as well as the Isle of Man later on, would form into two entities, the Earldom of Orkney and the Kingdom of the Isles. The Earldom of Orkney was a part of the Kingdom of Norway and an overseas colony essentially. The Kingdom of the Isles, while Norwegian, was its own kingdom and independent, at least at first. Meanwhile, Danish and Swedish Vikings didn't really do much in Scotland and focused elsewhere. But in 1098, the Norwegians took control of them too and signed a treaty with Scotland where Scotland agreed to let the Vikings keep the islands so that there would be no unnecessary fighting over them. However, in spite of this, those islands were too far away for direct rule anyway, so they still essentially acted on their own. With the control of these islands, they focused on raiding Ireland, at one point even occupying Dublin for a short time. But this prosperity for them would not last. Along came Godred, who became the next ruler of the Isles. He was described as an almost dictator and as a result became very unpopular. This would begin to fracture as local islands would work against him and for their own interests. Eventually, by the early 1200s, it had fractured altogether. This would allow for Scotland to begin to reassert its influence over the islands. Eventually, Scotland would actively dispute the Hebrides in the Isle of Man and decide to wage outright war with Norway in 1262. While the battles at sea proved mostly inconclusive, the Norwegian king would die. Scotland then got lucky and the next Norwegian king decided to sign a treaty with them in 1266 to end the war and give Scotland the Hebrides and the Isle of Man. But it wasn't quite over yet, as the Vikings in the Isle of Man would keep fighting and resisting the Scottish until 1275 when Scotland finally won and took the island. But that wouldn't last long as the English would actually seize the Isle of Man in 1290. The Vikings would remain in the Orkney and Shetland Islands for almost another 2 centuries. Eventually, back in Scandinavia, the Danish king would become the king of Norway and Sweden, forming the Kalmar Union, so the Earldom of Orkney was included within his domains. King Christian I of Denmark, also ruling the Kalmar Union, ended up having a daughter who would marry the Scottish Prince James, who would later become James III of Scotland, and he needed a dowry for the wedding. He ended up deciding that the Orkney and Shetland Islands would actually be a perfect present, and gifted them as a dowry for the wedding, finally ending the Viking presence in Scotland. So as you can see, while the Vikings had more activity in England, they had a longer lasting presence in Scotland. It may not be the most important Viking adventure, but it's certainly an interesting one, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it. I'm EmperorTigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.